There comes a defining moment in every relationship. Not when someone leaves, not when the arguments stop, and not even when the silence becomes unbearable. The defining moment is when your heart quietly makes a decision that your lips have not yet spoken. It is the moment you stop fighting for someone who has been fighting against intimacy. It is the moment your energy changes. Most people think love ends with dramatic words or painful goodbyes. It doesn't. Love often ends in silence. Not because you stopped caring overnight, but because you finally realized that pouring yourself into someone who continuously pulls away is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you give, it never stays. Here's what many people never understand. The avoidant notices. Not immediately through your words. Not because you announce your departure, but because energy never lies. Human beings are incredibly sensitive to emotional patterns. We are wired to recognize consistency. When someone who always texted first suddenly doesn't. When someone who always chased suddenly becomes peaceful. When someone who always sought reassurance suddenly finds certainty within themselves, that shift creates confusion. Why? Because people become accustomed to predictable emotional patterns. The avoidant may not have appreciated your pursuit while you were giving it, but they noticed it. And when it disappears, something unexpected happens. Their internal world begins asking questions they never had to ask before. What changed? Why aren't they reacting? Why do they seem different? This is where the story changes. Most people think the avoidant immediately runs back because they suddenly become deeply emotional. That isn't usually how it works. They become curious before they become vulnerable. They observe before they confess. They test before they trust. And if you don't understand this, you'll mistake every test for genuine transformation. Life has an extraordinary way of teaching us through relationships. Every relationship is a classroom. Every disappointment is a lesson. Every heartbreak is an invitation to become someone stronger than the version of yourself who entered the relationship. Pain is not your punishment. Pain is your instructor. It asks one question over and over again. Who are you becoming because of this? Most people answer that question by becoming more desperate. But extraordinary people answer it by becoming more whole. Because strength isn't built when life gives you certainty. Strength is built when uncertainty can no longer control your emotions. That is the moment your power returns. When your peace becomes more valuable than proving your love. When your purpose becomes bigger than preserving a relationship. When your identity no longer depends on someone else's emotional availability. Everything changes from there. Because people respond differently to someone who needs them than they do to someone who simply chooses them. Need creates pressure. Choice creates freedom. And freedom is magnetic. Not because it manipulates, because it reflects authenticity. When you stop pretending to be okay with inconsistent effort, when you stop negotiating your standards, when you stop abandoning yourself to avoid being abandoned by someone else, you begin living from a completely different level of consciousness. That's where transformation begins. Not outside you, inside you. Because every breakthrough begins with a new belief. If your belief is, I need this person to complete me, your behavior will always reveal fear. But if your belief becomes, I am already complete, and relationships are an expression of my abundance rather than my survival, then everything about your life changes. Your posture changes. Your conversations change. Your decisions change. Your standards change. And eventually, your relationships change. Because life doesn't merely respond to what you want. Life responds to who you've become. That is the hidden law that governs every meaningful relationship. You don't attract what you beg for. You attract what aligns with your identity. So the real question isn't whether the avoidant realizes you don't love them anymore. The deeper question is whether you finally realized how deeply you must love yourself. Because self-respect is contagious. When someone witnesses a person who refuses to betray themselves, something inside them is forced to confront their own patterns. Sometimes that inspires change. Sometimes it creates resistance. But it always creates awareness. And awareness is where every transformation begins. The moment you stop living to be chosen is the moment you become unforgettable. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because authenticity always leaves a lasting impression. The world is starving for people who are emotionally secure. People who don't manipulate. People who don't chase. People who don't withdraw to gain power. People who simply stand rooted in truth become that person, not for them, for yourself. Because your future isn't waiting for someone else's emotional readiness. Your future is waiting for your own emotional freedom. When you become emotionally free, something remarkable happens. You stop measuring your value by someone's response. You stop interpreting delayed texts as reflections of your worth. You stop believing someone's inability to love consistently is proof that you two are difficult to love. Instead, you begin understanding one of life's greatest truths. People give from the level of healing they possess. Someone who fears closeness often pushes away the very connection they secretly crave. Someone who hasn't learned emotional safety may mistake peace for boredom and consistency for vulnerability. That is their journey, not yours. Your journey is to become someone whose heart is no longer governed by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of abandoning alone. Because once fear loses its authority, love finally gains its freedom. Real love is never built on emotional dependency. It is built on emotional responsibility. You become responsible for your joy, responsible for your peace, responsible for your purpose. And from that place, every relationship becomes healthier because it is no longer carrying the impossible burden of completing you. The greatest relationships are not formed by two incomplete people desperately trying to fix each other. They are formed by two growing individuals who have learned that love flourishes where freedom, when responsibility meet. So if someone who once avoided closeness suddenly realizes your love has faded, they may test your reactions. They may reach out unexpectedly. They may become warmer. They may revisit old memories. They may create opportunities to see whether your heart is still waiting. But your responsibility is not to pass their test. Your responsibility is to honor your growth. If they've genuinely transformed, time will reveal it. If they haven't, consistency will expose it. Either way, you win when you refuse to betray your own progress. Never confuse temporary attention with lasting change. Never mistake curiosity for commitment. And never trade the peace you've built for the familiarity that once broke you. Your destiny is too important to be delayed by someone else's emotional uncertainty. Stand firm, stay grounded, continue growing, because the strongest version of you isn't the one who convinced someone to stay. It's the one who discovered they were already enough, whether someone stayed or left. That is real freedom. That is lasting confidence. That is the beginning of a life where your happiness is no longer negotiated, your peace is no longer borrowed, and your future is no longer controlled by the fears of another person. And once you reach that place, you no longer wonder whether someone will choose you. You become the person who chooses a life worthy of your highest potential every single day. There is a moment that changes everything, and it rarely arrives with dramatic words. It doesn't come with an emotional confession or a heartfelt apology. Instead, it appears quietly, almost invisibly, through a shift in your energy. Long before an avoidant hears you say, "I'm done," they often begin to sense that something inside you has changed. The person who once reached out first every morning suddenly becomes comfortable with silence. The person who once over-explained every feeling now speaks with calm confidence. The person who once chased every ounce of connection begins investing that energy into their own growth. They notice this shift because human beings are naturally wired to recognize changes in emotional patterns. Even someone who struggles with intimacy can feel when the emotional current flowing toward them begins to fade. This is an important lesson because your energy always speaks louder than your words. You can tell someone you still love them while your actions reveal exhaustion. You can tell someone you're moving on while secretly waiting for them to chase you. But genuine emotional transformation cannot be faked. It changes your posture, your priorities, your decisions, and the way you respond to life's challenges. When you've truly reached the point where your happiness no longer depends on another person's validation, people feel that difference. They may not understand it immediately, but they recognize it. Many people make the mistake of believing they need one final conversation to make someone realize their value. They think one more emotional message, one more explanation, or one more attempt to prove their love will finally open the other person's eyes. Yet lasting influence is rarely created through persuasion. It is created through transformation. When you become emotionally grounded, your life begins communicating what your words never could. Confidence has a language that requires no translation. Peace carries a message that doesn't need to be announced. Life has a remarkable way of revealing truth through absence. Sometimes people don't appreciate what was consistently available until it is no longer there. This isn't about creating distance as a strategy or playing games to trigger someone's impulso. It's about genuinely redirecting your attention toward becoming the strongest version of yourself. There is a profound difference between withdrawing to manipulate someone and stepping back because you've chosen to protect your peace. One is driven by fear. The other is driven by wisdom. The greatest shift happens within you. Instead of waking up wondering whether they will text, you wake up asking how you can improve your own life today. Instead of measuring your worth by their attention, you measure your growth by your character. Instead of waiting for someone else to create your happiness, you become responsible for creating it yourself. That inner decision changes every external interaction. People often underestimate the power of emotional stability. In a world filled with impulsive reactions, calmness stands out. When you stop reacting to every mixed signal, when you refuse to be controlled by uncertainty, and when you remain centered regardless of another person's behavior, you demonstrate a level of strength that cannot be ignored. Emotional maturity isn't about suppressing your feelings. It's about refusing to let your feelings control your choices. Remember this truth. Your value has never been determined by someone's ability to recognize it. A diamond remains valuable even when it is buried beneath the earth. Likewise, your worth remains intact whether someone appreciates it today, tomorrow, or never. The moment you stop trying to convince others of your value is the moment you begin living from only you now. That quiet confidence is what people notice first. It is the signal that you are no longer chasing approval but walking in purpose. And when your life becomes rooted in purpose rather than pursuit, you discover a freedom that no rejection can take away and no relationship can ever replace. Once an avoidant realizes that your emotional investment is no longer what it used to be, they rarely respond with a direct question. They usually don't come to you and say, "Do you still love me?" or "Have you moved on?" For someone who has spent much of their life protecting themselves from vulnerability, direct emotional exposure can feel incredibly uncomfortable. Instead, they often seek answers through subtle actions. They begin observing, testing, and watching to see whether they still hold the same emotional influence over you. These tests are not always planned or manipulative. Many happen unconsciously because they are searching for reassurance without risking rejection. You may suddenly receive a casual text after weeks or months of silence. They might react to your social media posts, bring up an old memory, ask an unexpected question, or find a reason to reconnect that seems insignificant on the surface. Sometimes they may appear unusually friendly, while at other times they become distant again immediately after receiving your attention. These mixed signals often leave people confused because they mistake curiosity for commitment. But curiosity and commitment are not the same thing. Someone can be curious about whether they still matter to you without being ready to build the kind of relationship you deserve. This is where emotional wisdom becomes your greatest strength. If every small gesture pulls you back into the same emotional cycle, then nothing has truly changed. Growth is measured by your response, not by their behavior. Anyone can remain calm when life is predictable. Real transformation is revealed when familiar patterns return and you choose not to abandon the progress you've worked so hard to build. Think about how many times people sacrifice their peace because they confuse attention with intention. A message arrives and suddenly they believe everything is different. A compliment is given and they assume lasting change has taken place. But one conversation cannot erase months or years of inconsistent behavior. One emotional moment cannot replace the steady consistency that healthy relationships require. Lasting change is demonstrated over time through repeated actions, not isolated moments. The strongest version of yourself understands that love should never require constant guessing. Healthy connection creates clarity more often than confusion. It doesn't demand that you analyze every text message or search for hidden meanings behind every interaction. It allows you to breathe. It creates emotional safety instead of emotional exhaustion. That is the standard you deserve. And you should never lower that standard simply because someone briefly reappears. Your greatest responsibility is not proving your love. It is protecting your growth. Every challenge in life presents a choice between returning to old habits or stepping into a new identity. If your old identity was built on chasing validation, then every test becomes an opportunity to repeat that pattern. But if your new identity is built on self-respect, confidence, and emotional responsibility, those same tests become opportunities to reinforce your transformation. Remember, true confidence is quiet. It doesn't rush to explain itself. It doesn't feel pressured to respond immediately. It doesn't fear losing someone by maintaining healthy boundaries. Confidence understands that anything worth building can withstand patience, honesty, presence, and consistency. Fear rushes. Wisdom waits. The beautiful truth is that you no longer have to pass anyone else's test. Life has already given you the only examination that truly matters, becoming the person who remains faithful to their own values regardless of another person's mass actions. When you reach that level of emotional freedom, every interaction changes. You stop asking whether they still want you, and you begin asking whether their actions align with the life you are creating. That single shift transforms your relationships because you are no longer seeking approval. You are exercising discernment. And discernment is one of the greatest forms of personal power a human being can possess. When an avoidant begins testing whether you still have feelings for them, the greatest response is not a perfectly crafted message, an emotional explanation, or an attempt to prove how much you have changed. The greatest response is emotional stability. There is an incredible strength in becoming someone whose peace is no longer determined by another person's actions. The moment you stop reacting impulsively and start responding intentionally, you step into a level of personal power that cannot be shaken by uncertainty. Most people believe strength is about saying the right words. In reality, strength is revealed through consistent behavior. Anyone can make promises during an emotional conversation. Anyone can declare that they have changed. But transformation is measured by what you repeatedly do, especially when old patterns try to pull you back. If you have truly grown, your calmness will communicate more than any speech ever could. People notice when your emotions are no longer controlled by delayed replies, mixed signals, or unpredictable behavior. They notice because genuine confidence has a presence that requires no announcement. One of the greatest lessons in life is understanding that your emotional state is your responsibility. That truth changes everything. As long as you believe someone else controls your happiness, you will continue living as a prisoner of their choices. If they call, you feel hopeful. If they disappear, you feel broken. If they give attention, you feel valuable. If they withdraw, you question your worth. That is not love. It is emotional dependence. Real freedom begins the moment you reclaim ownership of your inner world. Think about the strongest people you have ever met. They are not emotionless. They are not cold or distant. They simply refuse to let temporary circumstances dictate permanent decisions. They understand that emotions are valuable messengers, but they are poor leaders. Feelings deserve to be acknowledged, but they should never be allowed to control your direction. When you build your life on values instead of emotions, you become remarkably resilient. Storms may still come, but they no longer determine where your life is headed. An avoidant often expects the version of you they once knew. They may expect you to overreact, over-explain, chase, or seek reassurance. When that version no longer appears, something shifts. They begin realizing that your center of gravity has moved. You are no longer orbiting around their approval. You are standing firmly on your own foundation. That doesn't mean you become unkind or indifferent. It means your kindness now comes from strength instead of fear. You are no longer loving because you are afraid of losing someone. You are loving because it reflects your character. This is where self-respect becomes visible. Self-respect is not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It quietly establishes boundaries and honors them. It says, I can care about you without abandoning myself. I can wish you well without sacrificing my peace. I can listen without losing my voice. Those decisions create a life that is no longer driven by insecurity but guided by wisdom. Remember that every difficult relationship offers you a choice. You can continue repeating familiar cycles, or you can become someone new. Every challenge invites growth. Every disappointment gives you the opportunity to strengthen your character. Instead of asking, how can I make them understand my value? Begin asking, how can I live in a way that reflects my value every single day? That question shifts your focus from external validation to internal transformation. The remarkable thing about emotional stability is that it benefits every area of your life. It improves your relationships, your career, your health, your decisions, and your sense of purpose. You become less reactive and more intentional. You stop wasting energy on what you cannot control and invest it in what you can. You realize that your future is not built by convincing someone else to choose you. It is built by choosing your highest standards, your deepest values, and your greatest potential every single day. When you live from that place, no test can shake you because your identity is no longer rooted in another person's response. It is rooted in the unshakable truth that your peace, your purpose, and your worth come from within, and nothing outside of you has the authority to take them away. When an avoidant begins testing whether you still have feelings for them, the greatest response is not a perfectly crafted message, an emotional explanation, or an attempt to prove how much you have changed. The greatest response is emotional stability. There is an incredible strength in becoming someone whose peace is no longer determined by another person's actions. The moment you stop reacting impulsively and start responding intentionally, you step into a level of personal power that cannot be shaken by uncertainty. Most people believe strength is about saying the right words. In reality, strength is revealed through consistent behavior. Anyone can make promises during an emotional conversation. Anyone can declare that they have changed. But transformation is measured by what you repeatedly do, especially when old patterns try to pull you back. If you have truly grown, your calmness will communicate more than any speech ever could. People notice when your emotions are no longer controlled by delayed replies, mixed signals, or unpredictable behavior. They notice because genuine confidence has a presence that requires no announcement. One of the greatest lessons in life is understanding that your emotional state is your most responsibility. That truth changes everything. As long as you believe someone else controls your happiness, you will continue living as a prisoner of their choices. If they call, you feel hopeful. If they disappear, you feel broken. If they give attention, you feel valuable. If they withdraw, you question your worth. That is not love, it is emotional dependence. Real freedom begins the moment you reclaim ownership of your inner world. Think about the strongest people you have ever met. They are not emotionless. They are not cold or distant. They simply refuse to let temporary circumstances dictate permanent decisions. They understand that emotions are valuable messengers, but they are poor leaders. Feelings deserve to be acknowledged, but they should never be allowed to control your direction. When you build your life on values instead of emotions, you become remarkably resilient. Storms may still come, but they no longer determine where your life is headed. An avoidant often expects the version of you they once knew. They may expect you to overreact, over-explain, chase, or seek reassurance. When that version no longer appears, something shifts. They begin realizing that your center of gravity has moved. You are no longer orbiting around their approval. You are standing firmly on your own foundation. That doesn't mean you become unkind or indifferent. It means your kindness now comes from strength instead of fear. You are no longer loving because you are afraid of losing someone. You are loving because it reflects your character. This is where self-respect becomes visible. Self-respect is not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It quietly establishes boundaries and honors them. It says, I can care about you without abandoning myself. I can wish you well without sacrificing my peace. I can listen without losing my voice. Those decisions create a life that is no longer driven by insecurity but guided by wisdom. Remember that every difficult relationship offers you a choice. You can continue repeating familiar cycles, or you can become someone new. Every challenge invites growth. Every disappointment gives you the opportunity to strengthen your character. Instead of asking, how can I make them understand my value? Begin asking, how can I live in a way that reflects my value every single day? That question shifts your focus from external validation to internal transformation. The remarkable thing about emotional stability is that it benefits every area of your life. It improves your relationships, your career, your health, your decisions, and your sense of purpose. You become less reactive and more intentional. You stop wasting energy on what you cannot control and invest it in what you can. You realize that your future is not built by convincing someone else to choose you. It is built by choosing your highest standards, your deepest values, and your greatest potential every single day. When you live from that place, no test can shake you, because your identity is no longer rooted in another person's response. It is rooted in the unshakable truth that your peace, your purpose, and your worth come from within, and nothing outside of you has the authority to take them away. There is a powerful shift that takes place the moment you stop looking to someone else for permission to feel worthy. It is subtle at first, almost invisible, but its impact reaches every part of your life. The balance of the relationship begins to change because the source of your confidence has changed. When your happiness is no longer dependent on another person's approval, you stop giving away the greatest gift you possess, your emotional freedom. That is when the entire dynamic transforms. Many people unknowingly build relationships on the hope that someone else will complete them. They believe that if they can just receive enough love, enough attention, or enough reassurance, they will finally feel whole. But no relationship was ever designed to carry the weight of your identity. When you expect another person to fill the emptiness within you, you place a burden on them that no human being can sustain. Lasting fulfillment begins the moment you understand that your worth is an inside job. It is cultivated through your values, your purpose, your integrity, and your willingness to grow, not through someone else's ability to validate you. An avoidant often becomes accustomed to a certain pattern. They expect you to seek their attention, to pursue connection, to bridge every emotional gap, and to carry the weight of the relationship whenever distance appears. Over time, that pattern becomes predictable. They know that if they withdraw, you will likely move closer. If they become silent, you may become louder. If they create uncertainty, you may work harder to restore certainty. But everything changes when you no longer participate in that cycle. The pattern they once relied upon disappears, and with it, the emotional leverage they unknowingly held. This is not about playing games or trying to gain the upper hand. True transformation is never about controlling another person. It is about mastering yourself. There is an enormous difference between acting distant to provoke a reaction and genuinely finding peace within your own life. One is manipulation rooted in insecurity. The other is maturity rooted in self-respect. The goal is never to make someone chase you. The goal is to become someone who no longer chases because your life has become rich with purpose, growth, and meaning. When you stop seeking validation, your attention shifts toward building a future that reflects your highest potential. You begin investing in your health, your career, your faith, your family, your friendships, and your personal development. You realize that every hour once spent worrying about another person's choices can now be invested in becoming stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled. That decision changes your energy. You no longer walk into conversations hoping to be accepted. You walk into them already accepting yourself. There's something incredibly attractive about a person who is emotionally secure. They do not demand constant reassurance because they have learned to reassure themselves. They do not cling to relationships out of fear because they understand that abundance begins within. They love deeply, but they also know when to let go with grace. That kind of confidence cannot be manufactured. It is earned through the difficult process of choosing growth over comfort, discipline over desperation, and truth over temporary emotions. Remember, your standards are a reflection of your self-worth. Every time you accept behavior that contradicts your values, simply because you fear losing someone, you teach yourself that your needs are negotiable. But when you lovingly uphold healthy boundaries, you reinforce a different belief. That your peace deserves protection and your heart deserves consistency. This is not selfish, it is wisdom. You cannot build a healthy relationship by sacrificing the very foundation of your emotional well-being. The greatest victory is not watching someone suddenly recognize your value after years of taking you for granted. The greatest victory is recognizing your own value so clearly that whether they acknowledge it or not no longer determines the direction of your life. That is freedom. That is strength. And that is where true confidence is born. From that place, every relationship becomes a choice instead of a necessity. You stop asking, how do I keep someone from leaving? And begin asking, does this relationship align with the life, the values, and the future I am committed to creating? When you live by that question, you no longer surrender your power to another person's inconsistency. Instead, you become the architect of a life built on purpose, self-respect, and unshakable inner peace. One of the most misunderstood moments in any relationship happens when an avoidant realizes that your feelings are no longer what they once were. Their first response is not always acceptance. In fact, acceptance is often the last stage of the process. Before they fully believe that you have truly moved on, they may convince themselves that your silence is temporary, that your confidence is an act, or that your distance is simply another attempt to get their attention. They struggle to imagine that the person who once invested so much emotionally has genuinely reached a place of peace without them. That is why the testing often becomes more noticeable before reality finally settles in. This is where many people lose the progress they fought so hard to achieve. They mistake renewed attention for lasting transformation. A message arrives after weeks of silence, and suddenly old hopes return. A simple compliment is interpreted as a promise of change. A brief conversation becomes proof that everything will be different this time. But wisdom teaches us that one emotional moment should never outweigh a consistent pattern of clear behavior. Real change is not measured in days. It is revealed over time through repeated choices, dependable actions, and emotional accountability. Every person has patterns. Some patterns build healthy relationships, while others quietly destroy them. An avoidant who has spent years protecting themselves through emotional distance does not sit and usually transform overnight. Growth is possible for anyone, but genuine transformation requires self-awareness, responsibility, humility, and consistent effort. It is not enough for someone to miss you. Missing someone and becoming emotionally available are two completely different things. A person can feel lonely without being ready to create a healthy relationship. They can miss your presence while still avoiding the vulnerability that real love requires. This is why your patience must be directed toward truth instead of temporary emotion. Instead of asking, do they seem different today? Begin asking, have their habits consistently changed over time? Consistency is the language of genuine growth. Anyone can behave differently for a few days when emotions are running high. Character, however, is revealed in ordinary moments. It is revealed when there is no crisis demanding change, no fear of losing someone creating urgency, and no emotional pressure forcing temporary effort. One of the greatest gifts you can give yourself is the ability to separate hope from reality. Hope is beautiful when it inspires growth, but it becomes dangerous when it blinds you to repeated patterns. Love should never require you to ignore what your experience has consistently shown you. Listen to actions more than promises. Observe consistency more than intensity. Lasting relationships are not built on dramatic emotional highs. They are built on daily reliability, mutual respect, honest communication, and the willingness of both people to grow together. Remember that your healing was never meant to make you emotionally unavailable. It was meant to make you emotionally wise. There is a significant difference. Emotional wisdom allows you to remain open-hearted without becoming naive. It allows you to forgive without forgetting the lessons that shaped your growth. It allows you to care deeply while still protecting the peace you worked so hard to build. Life will always present moments that test your new identity. The question is never whether those moments will come. The question is who you will be when they arrive. Will you return to chasing certainty from someone who has not consistently demonstrated it? Or will you honor the person you have become through discipline, self-respect, and personal growth? Every choice strengthens one version of your identity and weakens another. The truth is that your silence is not what changes the relationship, your transformation does. Your peace is not a strategy, it is the result of healing. And once healing becomes real, you stop needing another person to validate your worth. If they have truly grown, their consistency will reveal it naturally. If they have not, their old patterns will eventually return. Either way, you no longer fear the outcome because your future is no longer dependent on someone else's readiness. It is built upon your unwavering commitment to live with integrity, protect your peace, and never again abandon yourself in the hope of being chosen by someone who has not yet learned how to choose with consistency. The greatest victory in life is not convincing someone to love you. It is becoming someone who no longer needs another person's parole to recognize your own worth. There is an extraordinary freedom that comes when your identity is no longer attached to whether someone stays or leaves, responds or remains silent, chooses you or walks away. That freedom is not born from bitterness. It is born from healing. It is the result of discovering that your value has never been determined by another person's emotional capacity. It has always existed within you, waiting for you to believe it. Too many people spend years trying to become enough for someone else. They change their personality, lower their standards, silence their needs, and ignore their intuition, hoping that if they sacrifice enough of themselves, they will finally receive the love they have been searching for. But the painful truth is this: whenever you abandon yourself to keep another person close, you lose something far more valuable than the relationship. You lose your connection with the person you were created to become. Life was never meant to be lived from a place of constant emotional survival. You were not created to wake up every day wondering if you are loved enough, appreciated enough, or important enough. You were created with purpose, with gifts, with dreams that extend far beyond the limits of one relationship. The moment you begin living for that purpose instead of living for another person's validation, everything starts to change. Your confidence becomes genuine because it is rooted in character rather than compliments. Your peace becomes lasting because it is built on truth rather than temporary circumstances. When an avoidant realizes that you no longer need to be chosen, something significant often happens. They may become curious. They may wonder what changed. They may even begin questioning why their usual patterns no longer affect you the way they once did. But by this stage, your focus is no longer centered on their reaction. Your greatest achievement is not making them notice your growth. Your greatest achievement is that you continued growing whether they noticed or not. That is authentic transformation. There is incredible strength in becoming someone who walks away from unhealthy patterns without hatred. Bitterness keeps you emotionally connected to the past just as much as longing does. Healing allows you to release both. It gives you the ability to appreciate the lessons without carrying the wounds into your rage. Every difficult relationship has something to teach you. Some teach you how to communicate. Some teach you patience. Others teach you boundaries. And some teach you the priceless lesson that loving yourself is not selfish, it is essential. Never underestimate the power of self-respect. Self-respect influences every decision you make. It determines the conversations you are willing to have, the behavior you are willing to accept, and the future you are willing to create. When self-respect becomes your foundation, you stop settling for relationships that require you to shrink your dreams or ignore your needs. You stop chasing people who repeatedly show you they are unwilling to meet you with the same level of commitment. Instead, you become intentional about building connections rooted in honesty, consistency, mutual effort, and emotional maturity. The most fulfilling relationships are not built by two people desperately trying to complete one another. They are built by two individuals who have already learned to stand firmly on their own. They come together not because they are empty, but because they have something meaningful to share. Love flourishes when it is a choice instead of a necessity. It becomes healthier when it grows from abundance rather than fear. As you move forward, remember that every experience has been preparing you for a greater version of yourself. Every disappointment has strengthened your resilience. Every setback has refined your character. Every season of uncertainty has invited you to place your confidence in something deeper than another person's affection. The journey was never simply about finding the right relationship. It was about becoming the right person, someone who leads with integrity, protects their peace, embraces growth, and refuses to compromise their values for temporary attention. That is the ultimate victory. You no longer measure success by whether someone finally realizes your value. You measure success by the person you have become because of the journey. You wake up each day knowing that your happiness is your responsibility, your purpose is greater than your pain, and your future is not limited by anyone else's fears or emotional limitations. From that place, you are no longer waiting to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself, your growth, your purpose, and the life you were always meant to live. And when you live from that level of certainty, you become unstoppable, not because life is perfect, but because your spirit is no longer dependent on circumstances. It is anchored in unwavering self-belief, enduring purpose, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are already enough.